Across oceans and ice-laden seas, vessels have appeared where no human hand steers them. Ships that drift for years or decades with decks eerily empty and crews vanished without a trace. From the fog-bound shoals of North Carolina to the frozen Arctic expanses, these maritime enigmas defy explanation, leaving only fragments, sightings, and lingering questions. Each case reveals the ocean's capacity for secrets, a realm where human logic falters against the weight of vanished lives and unaccountable events. As you navigate the spectral waters of these abandoned ships, you will trace the paths of schooners, catamarans, and cargo vessels lost to time yet recurring in the memories of those who saw them. You will witness ice-choked harbours, silent cabins with meals left untouched, and the restless tides that carried them across continents. Along the way, the stories of vanished crews, persistent sightings, and the mysteries they left behind unfold in quiet, haunting detail. The perfectly empty brigantine, Mary Celeste. The Atlantic was calm on the morning of December 5, 1872, when the crew of the merchant brigantine DEI Gratia spotted a vessel drifting without purpose through the waters east of the Azores. The ship, the Mary Celeste, was a sturdy brigantine built in 1861, measuring approximately 103 feet in length with a tonnage of 282. Its masts rose sharply into the sky, sails loosely hanging yet mostly intact, and it carried a cargo of industrial denatured alcohol destined for Genoa. From the outset, the scene struck the observers as unnervingly still, as if the vessel had been frozen in time. The Mary Celeste had departed New York Harbor a little over a month earlier, on November 7, 1872, under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs. He was a seasoned mariner, respected for his meticulous attention to detail, and he had undertaken the voyage with his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, aboard. The crew numbered 7 experienced seamen, all hired for transatlantic passage, their ages ranging from early 20s to mid-30s. The manifest listed the cargo clearly, and preparations for the voyage had been thorough, suggesting no reason for sudden alarm or abandonment. When the DEI Gratia approached, the ship appeared eerily ordinary. Its rigging swayed lightly in the Atlantic breeze, the deck was empty, and the lifeboat was missing. There were no signs of struggle or fire, and the cargo of 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol remained intact below deck. Personal belongings, provisions, navigational instruments, and even the ship's papers were undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the absence of human presence created an immediate and unexplainable tension, a quietness that suggested some sudden and collective disappearance. Captain Morehouse of the DEI Gratia ordered a careful boarding, sending a small party onto the brigantine to investigate. They noted that the hatches were closed, the lamps extinguished, and the galley untouched. The logbook lay on the captain's desk, meticulously kept up to the day before departure, and there were no entries to suggest distress or impending danger. The ship's compass and other instruments were functional, and the hold showed no sign of damage or tampering. Every aspect of the vessel's condition contradicted the complete absence of its crew. In examining the Mary Celeste, the rescuers found that the ship was seaworthy and free from leaks, despite the Atlantic swell. The sails had been partially furled and the main hatches secured, indicating routine procedures rather than panic. One of the most unsettling discoveries was that the ship's lifeboat was missing, though the reason for its absence could not be immediately determined. There were no bodies, no discarded belongings, and no signs that the crew had attempted a hurried evacuation into the ocean. The very orderliness of the scene deepened the mystery. The brigantine's logbook provided no clues. The last entry was made on November 25th, nearly 2 weeks before the discovery, and it contained only routine notes about position, course, and weather. There were no hints of mechanical problems, mutiny, illness, or threats from pirates. The calm and precise record-keeping contrasted starkly with the absence of everyone on board, leaving investigators with nothing to explain the crew's fate. The entry's normality heightened the unease, suggesting that the abandonment, if there was one, had been sudden and deliberate. Authorities in Gibraltar, where the Mary Celeste was eventually brought for inspection, conducted a formal inquiry. The board examined the ship thoroughly, assessing the condition of the cargo, hull, rigging, and personal effects. Every testable fact reinforced the same conclusion: the vessel had been abandoned in perfect order. Some barrels of alcohol had leaked slightly, but the damage was minor and could not account for the evacuation. The inquiry concluded that the ship had been seaworthy at the time it was found, further deepening the enigma. Newspapers seized upon the story, spreading theories that ranged from plausible to fantastical. Some suggested piracy, though the lack of violence or theft contradicted this explanation. Others proposed mutiny, yet the ship's logs and preserved order made deliberate insurrection appear unlikely. Some commentators pointed to natural phenomena, from sudden waterspouts to rogue waves, imagining an event so swift that the crew had no time to react. Each explanation carried weaknesses, and none could definitively account for the empty vessel drifting through the Atlantic. Modern researchers have examined more subtle possibilities. The alcohol cargo, known to release flammable vapours, may have created an invisible risk that forced the crew to temporarily abandon ship. Sudden weather, small fires or toxic fumes could have prompted a cautious evacuation into the lifeboat. Yet these hypotheses remain speculative, and there is no record of bodies, lifeboats recovered in the vicinity, or debris from a panic. The ocean swallowed any trace, leaving only a ship that sailed without its crew. The human dimension of the mystery persists as well. Captain Briggs was known for his careful habits, which included securing the ship and checking on provisions daily. His family was aboard, and the crew was competent and experienced. None had cause to desert the voyage, and the Atlantic weather at the time was relatively mild. There was no evidence of illness or interpersonal conflict. These facts make it difficult to imagine any scenario in which the entire ship could be evacuated, leaving all belongings behind without any subsequent trace. Several subsequent theories emerged in maritime literature. One suggestion involved a sudden fear of explosion from the cargo of alcohol, prompting the crew to abandon ship hastily. Another entertained the notion of an unseen marine threat or hallucination, perhaps due to gases emitted from the hold. Some even proposed supernatural forces, though these ideas are largely considered folklore. In every case, the mystery is reinforced by the absence of definitive evidence. The sea had swallowed all tangible clues, leaving only a silent vessel. Despite attempts to locate survivors or trace the lifeboat, no one associated with the Mary Celeste was ever found. The Atlantic waters and surrounding currents made it plausible that any escape attempt would have ended tragically, yet the complete disappearance remained perplexing. It is equally possible that the crew launched the lifeboat for a temporary maneuver, never to return. Whatever occurred, no records, no bodies, and no credible sightings have resolved the enigma, leaving the brigantine as a testament to an unresolved maritime mystery. The mystery has persisted into modern scholarship, with historians and writers analysing shipping routes, weather logs, and contemporary reports. Even with advancements in nautical science and oceanography, the fate of the Mary Celeste's crew has never been determined. The ship itself became a symbol of the unknown, a tangible reminder that the ocean can swallow both people and certainty, leaving only a vessel that continues to drift through maritime memory. The cultural impact of the Mary Celeste is undeniable. Literature, films, and maritime folklore have seized upon the story, dramatising both the disappearance and the ghostly image of the empty brigantine. Despite embellishments, the core facts remain intact. The ship was found fully provisioned, with cargo secure and no one aboard. Each retelling preserves the quiet tension and the unanswered questions that continue to fascinate scholars and enthusiasts alike. Even in modern discussions of ghost ships, the Mary Celeste stands apart. It represents a case where evidence exists in abundance, yet answers remain absent. It challenges assumptions about maritime disaster, human behaviour, and the unpredictable nature of the sea. Scholars examining currents, drift patterns, and Atlantic weather can only hypothesize, offering theories without certainty. The brigantine's intact hull is a paradoxical record, documenting care and order in the absence of life. Navigational records and maritime archives continue to reference the vessel, noting its construction, voyages, and final discovery. Logbooks from contemporary ships, Board of Inquiry documents, and official registry details provide layers of verifiable history. Yet each document adds only context, not explanation. The mystery endures because facts do not resolve the ultimate question: how a competent crew, fully provisioned and familiar with their ship, could vanish entirely. Even today, sailors and historians speak of the Mary Celeste in hushed tones, acknowledging the enduring allure of a vessel that sailed unmanned through the Atlantic. Its image, white sails billowing in the wind, deck empty, lifeboat gone, remains a visual shorthand for maritime mystery. Every account, from contemporary newspaper reports to modern scholarly analyses, reinforces a sense of quiet awe. It is not horror, but a profound unease rooted in absence. The Mary Celeste's fate continues to inform maritime safety, navigational caution, and theories about sudden ship abandonment. Ocean currents, wind patterns, and cargo volatility are studied in reference to the case, offering lessons for shipping even today. Yet these technical analyses cannot diminish the fundamental enigma. A ship perfectly seaworthy and provisioned, once commanded by capable mariners, drifted alone and empty, a silent witness to a vanished crew. The story remains unresolved, yet every verifiable fact contributes to its mystique. Each barrel of alcohol, every logbook entry, and every undisturbed personal belonging reinforces the tension between the ordinary and the inexplicable. The Atlantic holds its secrets, and the Mary Celeste is their messenger, a vessel that embodies the unknown in both history and imagination. The Mary Celeste sailed on, carrying only the echoes of lives that had vanished without a trace. The schooner on Diamond Shoals, Carroll A. Deering. Mist clung to the shifting sands of Diamond Shoals, and through the grey haze a 5-masted schooner loomed silently, its hull listing slightly against the restless Atlantic swell. The water around it was deceptively calm, yet beneath the surface the shoals concealed treacherous sandbanks that had claimed countless vessels before. Mariners passing the area would later describe an uneasy feeling upon seeing the Carroll A. Deering grounded, a ship that seemed to exist both in the present and as an echo of misfortune. Its silhouette against the fog carried a sense of unresolved tension, as though the sea itself had decided to hold its secrets. Constructed in the early 20th century for cargo transport along the east coast, the Carroll A. Deering was a large, imposing vessel built for endurance and speed. At 287 feet in length with a full 5 masts, the schooner was among the last of the tall sailing ships designed for commercial freight before steam began dominating transatlantic trade. Owned by the G.O.W. Carroll Company, she had made multiple voyages along the Atlantic coast, transporting coal and other goods between New England ports and the Carolinas. Each plank, rope and sail had been maintained with care, a testament to her owner's investment and the pride of her crew. Captain George Moorhead, experienced in coastal and transatlantic trade, commanded a crew of seasoned seamen, whose knowledge of the Atlantic shoals was considered reliable and precise. The men had weathered previous storms, navigated shifting channels, and understood the treacherous reputation of Cape Hatteras. Their competence was not in question, and contemporaneous reports described them as careful and diligent. Some observers noted that Moorhead's leadership style was firm yet measured, ensuring that all crew members performed their duties with routine precision, a fact that makes the eventual disappearance all the more confounding. The schooner had departed Wilmington under routine conditions, carrying a documented cargo of coal and other freight destined for northern ports. Weather records from early January 1921 indicate relatively mild conditions, though the waters near the Outer Banks were notorious for sudden fog and squalls. The Carroll A. Deering moved steadily along her plotted course, and nothing in the logs, which were later recovered from coastal records, suggested any unusual activity. For a ship built to endure the Atlantic, the journey should have been uneventful, yet the story would unfold in ways no mariner could have foreseen. Squalls and sudden gusts buffeted the North Carolina coast, challenging even the most cautious sailors and shaping the treacherous reputation of the surrounding waters. The currents around Diamond Shoals were unpredictable, and shoal formations constantly shifted beneath the surface, creating hidden sandbars capable of grounding even the most experienced ships. These conditions demanded constant vigilance, and a brief lapse in attention could result in disaster. Mariners navigating this stretch of ocean often spoke of a pervasive sense of unease, as if the waters themselves conspired to conceal secrets. Observers reported the Deering on its last confirmed course, sails taut against the wind yet moving sluggishly, hinting at an unseen struggle against currents and tides. Some noted that the vessel appeared to lurch strangely, as though fighting an invisible resistance. There were no signals, no flares, and no distress calls recorded in nearby ports. By the time the schooner failed to arrive at her next scheduled destination, concern grew among shipping companies and coastal authorities, who understood the dangers posed by the shoals in the Atlantic winter. Grounded upon the shoals, the schooner presented an eerie stillness, masts upright, sails partially set, and the deck empty of life or sign of panic. Those who later approached described a ship that seemed perfectly preserved, yet wholly abandoned. The rigging swayed gently with the breeze, and the sound of waves breaking against the hull echoed along the sandbars. It was a haunting tableau, the kind of scene that lodges in memory precisely because it resists explanation. Inspectors stepping aboard noted the logbooks lay untouched, papers secured, and personal items in their proper places, offering no immediate clue to the disappearance. Instruments for navigation were functional, and the helm showed no evidence of tampering or mechanical failure. Crew quarters were undisturbed, and personal belongings, including clothing and navigational tools, were in ordinary order. The absence of signs of struggle created a profound tension. A fully staffed vessel, equipped and seaworthy, had somehow been abandoned without any trace of its crew. The cargo of coal, heavy and unshifted, remained in the hold, and the hull showed little damage beyond that expected from routine navigation hazards. No evidence suggested fire, explosion, or structural compromise. The sails, partially furled, indicated that the crew had followed standard procedures for temporary anchoring or preparation, yet they had not returned. Every tangible aspect of the vessel indicated that it had been operated correctly, deepening the mystery of its deserted state. Local authorities scoured nearby waters for the crew, deploying lifeboats and search parties, yet no trace of human life could be found. Observers combed the shoals and the surrounding coastline, examining debris and any sign of the missing sailors. The ocean yielded nothing. No bodies, no wreckage from an emergency launch, no drifted lifeboats. The complete absence of the crew reinforced the inexplicable nature of the event, leaving the Carroll A alone, intact and silent. A formal inquiry attempted to reconcile what could have happened, weighing storms, mechanical failure, piracy and human error, yet every theory collided with the stark evidence of an intact vessel. Witness testimonies, shipping logs, and environmental data offered potential explanations, but none fit the facts in their entirety. The schooner had been seaworthy, provisions were adequate, and the cargo remained untouched. Investigators could only conclude that a disappearance had occurred under circumstances that defied logical reconstruction. Some historians noted patterns among similar Atlantic vanishings, from small fishing schooners to larger cargo vessels, creating a backdrop of recurring maritime enigmas. Reports of unaccountable disappearances off the North Carolina coast, sometimes dubbed the graveyard of the Atlantic, hinted at environmental hazards and rare phenomena. Yet the scale and suddenness of the Deering's abandonment remained extraordinary, separating it from more mundane maritime accidents. Environmental hazards, including shifting sandbars and rogue waves, were considered alongside the potential for coal dust ignition or minor onboard fire. While each theory accounted for certain aspects of the schooner's grounding, none fully explained the absence of the crew. The physical evidence contradicted the idea of panic or violent evacuation, suggesting that whatever compelled the sailors to leave was swift, sudden, or otherwise extraordinary. Even grounded and abandoned, the schooner retained a presence in maritime records, cited in newspapers and shipping logs, a testament to both loss and uncertainty. Coverage in local newspapers amplified public fascination, while shipping companies documented the incident as an unusual maritime case. Over the decades, the story has appeared in studies of Atlantic navigation, the dangers of diamond shoals, and accounts of mysterious ship disappearances, preserving the vessel's legacy in both fact and lore. The wind whispered across the empty deck, carrying with it the unanswered questions of what might have compelled an experienced crew to vanish so completely. Observers remarked on the stillness of the masts, the subtle sway of the rigging, and the silent water around the grounded schooner. Each feature of the vessel contributed to a pervasive unease, emphasizing the contrast between order and absence, preparedness and unexplained abandonment. Even decades later, Diamond Shoals remains a place of quiet danger, where history preserves the unsolved story of a ship, intact yet bereft of those who once sailed her. Scholars continue to study currents, weather logs, and shipping records, yet the Carroll A refuses to reveal the truth behind its crew's disappearance. The case endures as one of the Atlantic's most compelling maritime mysteries. a reminder that the ocean does not always disclose its secrets. Somewhere among the shifting shoals, the Carroll A Deering continues to haunt the Atlantic as a vessel of vanished lives and unresolved mystery. The unsinkable ship with no survivors, MV Joyita. On a calm South Pacific morning, the Joyita drifted silently through the water, partially submerged, her decks empty and cargo intact, an unsettling sight for those who first encountered her. The vessel's hull listed slightly to starboard, yet she remained afloat despite evidence of water in her forward compartments. Sailors approaching the ghostly ship described the air as heavy with an uneasy quiet. The only sound the gentle lap of waves against the partially flooded hull. No crew appeared on deck, no signals flared, and the lifeboats were missing or damaged, leaving an immediate impression that something inexplicable had occurred in these isolated waters. Praised for her sturdiness and versatility, the Joyita had earned a reputation among sailors as nearly unsinkable, a vessel built to traverse long distances while carrying both passengers and freight safely. Constructed in 1931 in California, she combined reinforced hulls with a semi-luxury design intended for South Pacific inter-island travel and cargo transport. Owners and mariners alike trusted the ship for reliability in unpredictable ocean conditions. Her reputation only amplified the shock when investigators found her abandoned, a vessel that should have withstood minor storms, mechanical failures, and human error. Records indicate she departed Samoa on a routine supply run, fully provisioned, yet the logs and manifest reveal no hint of the unusual events that would soon unfold. The Joyita carried 25 passengers, including a few families, alongside a crew of 21, transporting general freight, medical supplies, and some perishable goods. Departure seemed ordinary, and witnesses recall no tension, no unusual cargo stowage, nor any indication that the journey would end in the vessel drifting silently with no living souls aboard. The surrounding waters were deceptively calm, but hidden reefs, shifting currents, and occasional sudden squalls made the South Pacific a region where even experienced crews remained alert. Mariners familiar with the area knew that unpredictable weather and invisible shoals could quickly turn routine crossings into life-threatening scenarios. These environmental hazards, however, could not fully explain the state of the Joyita, which appeared only partially flooded, with no evidence of violent storm damage or collisions with reefs or other vessels. Those who first approached the drifting ship were struck by her stillness. Partially flooded yet afloat, she bore no sign of human presence despite the intact equipment and cargo. The deck furniture remained in place, personal items scattered minimally, and the galley showed signs of normal activity interrupted abruptly. Even seasoned mariners later remarked that the ship's appearance suggested a deliberate departure, yet no one could explain why every soul aboard had vanished without leaving a trace. Observers noted that some cabins were locked, while others contained belongings neatly arranged, a level of order that seemed incompatible with the sudden disappearance of over 40 people. Boarding parties noted functioning navigational instruments, neatly stowed logs, and personal belongings left undisturbed, suggesting the crew had vanished without warning or apparent cause. The radio transmitter, critical for communication, was found powered down but intact, with no recorded distress messages sent before discovery. Additionally, the engine and auxiliary systems showed no catastrophic failure, and the hull itself bore no structural breaches beyond minor wear. Investigators confronted a paradox. The ship had clearly suffered some ingress of water, yet offered no clues that would justify abandoning her entirely. Lifeboats were missing or damaged, yet the main vessel's integrity seemed largely uncompromised, raising questions that baffled investigators familiar with maritime disasters. Searches of the surrounding waters yielded no survivors, wreckage, or debris from a lifeboat launch. Some speculated that rough seas might have claimed small craft, yet the absence of evidence for capsizing, collision, or human struggle only deepened the mystery. The juxtaposition of intact seaworthiness and missing crew created a scenario that baffled even the most experienced maritime authorities. Marine specialists emphasized that the ship's design should have prevented rapid flooding, underscoring the difficulty of reconciling the vessel's condition with the total disappearance of her crew. Reinforced bulkheads, watertight compartments, and redundant bilge pumps had been standard, yet water had slowly filled forward areas without triggering alarms or causing structural failure. Specialists noted that if human intervention had been required to manage flooding, it would have been obvious that the crew had failed to act, but evidence suggested otherwise. While storm damage, mechanical failure, or human error were considered, none could simultaneously account for partial flooding, abandoned lifeboats, and an empty crew compartment. Piracy, mutiny, or intentional evacuation were also explored. However, valuables remained untouched, and no witnesses reported suspicious vessels in the vicinity. Each theory addressed fragments of the puzzle but left fundamental questions unanswered, allowing the Joyita to persist as a case of unresolved maritime enigma. Analysts have noted parallels with other mid-20th century South Pacific disappearances, highlighting a troubling pattern of vessels found intact yet bereft of human life. Comparable cases include smaller fishing vessels that were later discovered adrift, often under conditions that could not fully explain crew absence. While these incidents offered circumstantial context, the Joyita's scale, the partial flooding, and the number of missing people placed her in a category of particularly profound mystery. Floating silently, the Joyita conveyed a sense of deliberate stillness, as if suspended between her intended purpose and the unknown forces responsible for emptying her decks. The sun glinted off the waterlogged hull, and the faint scent of salt and fuel lingered, emphasizing the quiet absence of life. The surrounding ocean offered no answers, only a mirror of the impossibility unfolding aboard the drifting ship. Even today, the Joyita remains a subject of fascination and study, the circumstances of her abandonment continuing to defy explanation. Maritime historians, naval architects, and oceanographers have analysed the vessel for decades, yet no single theory accounts fully for the crew's disappearance, the partial flooding, and the absence of lifeboat evidence. Each new study reinforces the sense that the ship's story belongs to the ocean as much as to human record. The Joyita endures as a silent enigma of the South Pacific, a vessel whose vanished crew leaves the ocean's secrets stubbornly intact. The Arctic wanderer, SS Baychimo. A pale sun barely pierced the endless expanse of drifting ice, where the Baychimo would first be seen abandoned, her black hull stark against the whiteness. The Arctic landscape stretched without interruption, silent except for the distant cracking of ice and the moan of frozen winds. Against this desolate backdrop, the ship appeared almost spectral, a dark shape moving among ice floes with no sign of life aboard. Those who glimpsed her first reported a strange tension, the impossible juxtaposition of a vessel built for trade yet entirely unmanned, adrift in one of the world's harshest environments. Sailors and hunters who encountered the drifting ship noted an impossible stillness, as if the Arctic itself had claimed her crew. Whispers of her presence spread quickly through coastal settlements and trading posts, creating a mixture of fear, fascination, and incredulity. Experienced mariners, who had navigated these waters for decades, described the Baychimo as a vessel that seemed alive in her movements yet entirely abandoned, a puzzle that defied their understanding of both seamanship and nature. In 1931, ice trapped the vessel off the coast of Alaska, compelling Captain Hans Andersen and his crew to evacuate in lifeboats, leaving behind cargo, equipment, and all but the barest essentials. The crew decided with caution and experience in mind, knowing that remaining aboard risked being crushed by shifting ice. Yet the ship itself appeared seaworthy, her reinforced hull intact and her decks largely unscathed, a silent testament to human engineering standing against nature's relentless power. Treacherous ice floes stretched in every direction, concealing hidden channels and sudden freezes that could imperil even the sturdiest ship. The Arctic environment was dynamic, with shifting ice ridges and sudden pressure cracks capable of puncturing a hull in moments. Even a single misjudged maneuver might spell disaster, a fact that every Arctic mariner knew, yet one that the Baychimo somehow survived despite being unmanned. Inuit hunters and whalers reported the dark silhouette of the ship drifting for weeks after abandonment, a ghostly presence against the stark Arctic horizon. Some described the vessel as moving slowly with the ice, appearing in one location and then disappearing, only to re-emerge miles away without any indication of how she had travelled. Witnesses often reported seeing the ship in areas of heavy ice where no other vessel could pass, reinforcing the sense that she was guided by forces beyond immediate human understanding. Over the following decades, the ship reappeared multiple times, drifting south and east among ice packs, only to vanish again into the frozen expanse. Documented sightings continued sporadically into the 1950s, nearly 40 years after her abandonment. Each encounter was recorded in shipping logs, newspaper reports, and Arctic trading posts, demonstrating her unusual longevity. Mariners were often unable to reach her directly, adding to the enigma, and the ship became a reference point in Arctic navigation tales as the ghost steamer that would not die. Salvage parties faced treacherous conditions, failing repeatedly to reach her. Expeditions were delayed or redirected by ice shifts, poor visibility, and the constant threat of storms. In several instances, teams came close enough to assess her condition but could not secure her safely. One report noted that when a team tried to approach by motorboat, the vessel had already drifted over 10 miles farther into the ice within a single day, demonstrating an unpredictability that baffled even the most experienced navigators. Despite the relentless Arctic elements, the hull remained largely intact, with only superficial damage from ice and time, evidence of remarkable resilience. Masts and rigging were sometimes intact and sometimes damaged, depending on the period and the severity of ice encounters. Her ice-reinforced hull, designed to withstand crushing pressure, undoubtedly played a role in her longevity, yet her survival for decades without maintenance remained extraordinary. Observers marvelled at her endurance, noting that she drifted for years without human intervention, proving the durability of both her construction and the ingenuity of her designers. Items from the hold were untouched, personal effects remained on board, and the absence of human life created a chilling puzzle for anyone encountering her. Cargo included supplies intended for remote settlements and perishable goods, yet the frozen conditions preserved much of it longer than expected. No signs of struggle, fire, or mechanical failure were ever reported, making her abandonment all the more baffling. Each glimpse reinforced the mystery, a vessel prepared for Arctic conditions yet empty. Shipping logs, local newspapers, and official reports recorded sightings over nearly 40 years, yet no explanation emerged for the ship's survival or the crew's disappearance. The meticulous documentation of repeated encounters provided a record of her persistence but offered little clarity. Over time, the Baychimo became a case study in Arctic maritime anomalies, cited by historians and shipping authorities as one of the most unusual prolonged vessel abandonments on record. The Baychimo became a legend among Arctic communities, embodying endurance, isolation, and an enigma that defied conventional maritime understanding. Tales of her ghostly drift circulated alongside practical accounts, blending myth and fact. Even when physical evidence was scarce, the consistency of eyewitness reports lent weight to the vessel's reputation as a spectral Arctic wanderer, a ship both feared and revered. While human hands had crafted her to navigate extreme waters, the Arctic seemed to claim ownership over her fate, leaving the vessel both preserved and trapped. Each appearance underscored the indifference of nature to human endeavour, a reminder that no matter the care, design, or foresight, the elements could dictate outcomes in ways humans could never fully control. The ship's presence became a meditation on resilience, isolation, and the mysteries inherent in the polar environment. By the 1960s, sightings ceased entirely, and the ship vanished from record, her ultimate fate concealed beneath ice and snow. Scholars, mariners, and Arctic researchers have speculated about where she finally succumbed to the ice or sank to the depths, yet no conclusive evidence has emerged. The enduring image of the Baychimo, drifting over decades, remains one of the Arctic's most compelling maritime enigmas. For many years she drifted across frozen waters, an unmanned sentinel of ice and silence whose fate the Arctic kept secret. The frozen logbook, Octavius. Mariners navigating the frozen Arctic first spotted the Octavius locked in ice, her hull immobile and her decks eerily clear of life. The vessel, dark against the shimmering white expanse, appeared both preserved and abandoned, a haunting reminder of the unforgiving polar environment. For those who glimpsed her through drifting floes, the ship seemed impossibly suspended between the present and decades past, a spectral figure that neither moved under human command nor succumbed entirely to the ice. A thick crust of ice covered the deck, sealing hatchways and rigging alike, leaving the ship in a frozen, almost otherworldly stillness. The timbers creaked faintly with the shifting ice, but there was no sign of life, no sound of wind in the sails beyond what the Arctic allowed. Explorers later noted that every element of the vessel appeared frozen in time, as if a sudden frost had halted not only the movement of water, but also the passage of human existence. Barrels of provisions and trade goods remained stacked neatly below deck, their contents preserved as if time had slowed around them. Spices, dried meat, and other supplies for distant settlements sat untouched, offering a silent record of a cargo intended for commerce but never delivered. Even the smallest items, ropes coiled and tools stowed, retained the order expected from a disciplined crew, a subtle testament to human diligence now juxtaposed against the overwhelming power of the Arctic. Figures were discovered in the hold and on deck, rigid and frozen, faces and hands captured in the cold grip of an Arctic winter that had endured unrelentingly. The crew appeared locked in everyday motions, one man reaching for a rope, another bent over a barrel, as though the cold had paused them mid-task. The effect was both horrifying and mesmerizing. A crew preserved in the moment of abandonment, silent witnesses to the years of drift they could never recount. The Octavius had set sail from England in 1761, bound for Greenland, part of a fleet engaged in Arctic trade, yet she never completed her journey or arrived at port. Contemporary records of her departure exist, but subsequent reports were sporadic, often vague, and mostly based on sightings by whalers, hunters, and explorers. No formal arrival was documented, and her disappearance quickly became the subject of speculation among maritime circles, even as news of her eventual discovery decades later would rekindle fascination and dread. Early explorers and shipping logs speculated on ice drift, sudden storms and shifting currents, documenting theories without ever explaining how a fully manned ship could remain frozen yet afloat for years. Some suggested the vessel had been trapped in a perpetual cycle of drift, frozen in pockets of calm ice and released into open channels, while others posited that the severe cold preserved both ship and crew, delaying decay far beyond ordinary expectation. Yet no theory accounted fully for the years during which the Octavius vanished from all observation. Evidence suggested the vessel may have drifted through Arctic waters for nearly a decade, carried by currents, ice packs, and the relentless cold that preserved her state and that of her crew. Sightings recorded by whalers and traders over multiple seasons showed the ship appearing in different regions, sometimes hundreds of miles from previous encounters. Each observation added to the enigma, leaving questions about navigation, ice flow, and the resilience of the vessel itself unanswered. Tales of the frozen ship spread among whalers and Arctic traders, growing into legend as the Octavius became known as a spectral reminder of both the sea's power and human fragility. Stories described the vessel as an omen of lost time, a floating monument to the Arctic's indifference, inspiring awe and fear alike. Even those who never saw her firsthand carried second-hand accounts, each contributing to the sense of inevitability and suspense that surrounds the ship in maritime lore. Observers described the uncanny sight of life suspended in ice, a vessel and crew locked in time, leaving the true story of their final voyage forever beyond reach. Subsequent study of drift patterns, Arctic currents, and the environmental extremes of the region provided context but no answers. The Octavius remained an artifact of mystery, a frozen snapshot of human endeavour halted by forces beyond comprehension. Whalers who ventured near her reported a strange stillness around the vessel, a quiet that was not merely the absence of wind or waves, but an almost palpable silence, as if the Arctic itself held its breath in respect, or perhaps in warning. The persistence of her frozen state, undisturbed by storms or pack ice, created an unnerving impression that this ship was not merely abandoned but somehow claimed, held in stasis far longer than natural laws seemed to allow. Even when attempts were made to remove her or investigate further, conditions proved too hazardous, and the ship continued to drift, trapped in ice, unseen for long periods before re-emerging as if by design. Each reappearance reinforced the notion that the Octavius had become something more than a vessel. She was a living record of Arctic survival, a frozen chronicle of a voyage whose details could never be fully reconstructed. Decades after her abandonment, no trace of the crew's fate beyond the preserved bodies could be discerned, and the ship itself eventually disappeared, swallowed by ice or storm, leaving only the memory of what had been witnessed. Scholars, explorers and historians have studied accounts and log fragments, but the Arctic withheld the final chapter of the Octavius, ensuring that her story would remain unresolved, both factual and uncanny. The Octavius drifts in legend and memory, a vessel frozen in time whose voyage whispers secrets the Arctic refuses to yield. The Antarctic ice prison, Jenny. Explorers navigating the remote Antarctic coast first noticed the Jenny, her hull encased in thick ice and her decks eerily silent after decades of isolation. The vessel appeared almost like a frozen monument, immobile yet intact, jutting from the ice like a black scar against the blinding white of the polar landscape. For those who approached, the ship conveyed a disquieting presence, a reminder that human ambition could be claimed entirely by a world indifferent to life or time. Icicles hung from the masts, and the deck appeared to have been sealed by the relentless Antarctic cold, preserving the vessel in an almost unnatural stillness. The rigging was stiff and unyielding, the sails frozen in place, as though the ship had been paused mid-voyage. Explorers noted a silence so profound that even the sound of waves breaking against the hull seemed muffled by the surrounding ice, giving the impression that the Jenny existed outside the normal flow of time. Crates and barrels of supplies remained undisturbed below deck, suggesting the ship had been prepared for a routine voyage that was never completed. Provisions meant to sustain a crew through months of polar navigation sat untouched, their contents protected by the frigid environment. The meticulous arrangement of cargo and the apparent readiness of the ship indicated that no sudden storm or emergency had caused a frantic evacuation, yet no crew remained. The crew had vanished without explanation, leaving behind personal effects and tools as haunting evidence of lives abruptly ended by circumstances no one could fully reconstruct. Clothing, instruments, and even small items like notebooks lay exactly where they had been placed, untouched by time or human interference. The absence of bodies beyond those presumed lost to the ice created a tension as profound as it was silent. The ship was perfectly preserved, yet utterly bereft of human life. Blizzards, shifting ice flows, and temperatures plunging far below freezing created conditions so extreme that even the most experienced sailors would have faced nearly certain death. Antarctic storms could appear without warning, and hidden pressure ridges in the ice could trap a vessel for weeks or months. Any crew attempting to abandon the ship risked vanishing into white oblivion, leaving only speculation about how the Jenny's sailors met their fate. The Jenny had set out from her port decades prior, bound for Antarctic trading routes, yet no port records ever confirmed her arrival, leaving only sparse sightings and reports from passing expeditions. Logs and communications from the era were incomplete, and the harsh environment limited the opportunity for verification. Over time, these gaps in documentation became part of the ship's enduring mystique, transforming it from a simple maritime misfortune into a symbol of polar peril. Accounts from explorers and whalers slowly transformed into legend, with stories of the frozen ship spreading as a reminder of the Antarctic's unforgiving reach. Observers told of a vessel that seemed to float frozen in both space and memory, a ghostly presence that inspired awe, fear, and speculation. Each mention in journals or letters reinforced the sense that the Jenny was more than an abandoned ship. It was a lingering warning etched in ice. The silent vessel stands as a stark emblem of the perils of polar navigation, its secrets locked in ice where time and tide hold dominion. Even modern researchers and historians acknowledge that, while the ship's existence is verified, the precise circumstances of the crew's disappearance remain unresolved. Every detail, from the preserved cargo to the frozen deck, contributes to a tableau of mystery that continues to captivate those who study the Antarctic frontier. The Jenny waits beneath the endless ice, a ghostly testament to a crew and voyage lost to the merciless Antarctic expanse. The ship that would not sink, Lyubov Orlova. Towboats struggled against a brisk Atlantic current as the Lyubov Orlova, once a proud Soviet cruise liner, suddenly broke free from its harness. The vessel, intended for dismantling, moved with surprising speed, drifting away from the crews tasked with guiding her safely to port. Observers on shore and aboard the tugs watched in disbelief as the ship, seemingly alive with momentum, slipped beyond their immediate control, leaving only a roiling wake behind. Measuring over 380 feet in length, the vessel had been designed for Arctic excursions and passenger comfort, with cabins and public spaces constructed to withstand frigid seas. Her hull, reinforced for icy waters, had earned a reputation as unsinkable among those familiar with her design. Despite years of inactivity following decommissioning, the structure remained solid, her decks and superstructure intact. A modern liner with the resilience of an older time-tested ship. Crews on the tug scrambled to regain control, shouting orders over the roar of engines and wind, yet the ship drifted with an eerie independence that seemed to mock human effort. Lines snapped under sudden strain, and attempts to maneuver her toward open water proved fruitless. For hours, the Lyubov Orlova resisted all intervention, moving as if guided by some unseen hand, leaving the towing crews exhausted and perplexed by the vessel's uncanny autonomy. Within hours, the Lyubov Orlova vanished beyond radar and visual range, leaving only distant wake patterns in the North Atlantic as evidence of her passage. Attempts to track her with satellite and radio communications failed, and by nightfall the ship had become a ghost in both electronic monitoring and human memory. The vastness of the ocean swallowed her entirely, an anomaly in a world accustomed to constant surveillance of maritime traffic. Maritime authorities examined records, sonar scans, and previous shipping reports, yet no evidence explained how a vessel of that size eluded all attempts at interception. Every retrieval effort, from tugboats dispatched to remote patrols, concluded with frustration. Reports confirmed her seaworthiness and intact structure, but the crew responsible for escorting her remained baffled. No mechanical failure, storm, or human negligence could account for the disappearance. Though the North Atlantic had long been a theatre of storms and shipwrecks, this disappearance was anomalous. A modern, fully seaworthy vessel had simply ceased to exist in tracked space. Shipping lanes were monitored, coastal radar was active, and yet the liner remained undetected. Historians note that such a disappearance challenged conventional assumptions about maritime safety, demonstrating that even contemporary ships could be rendered invisible by the sheer scale and unpredictability of the sea. Sailors passing the region spoke in hushed tones of a ghost liner, while media reports sensationalized the vanishing, cementing the Lyubov Orlova in maritime lore. Interviews with mariners years later referenced rumors of strange lights or vague silhouettes on the horizon, accounts impossible to verify but persistent enough to stir both fascination and fear. The ship became a symbol not only of mystery, but of the ocean's ability to confound human expectation, a vessel that seemed to resist capture entirely. The ship's fate remains unconfirmed, and its solitary journey serves as a chilling reminder that, even in modern times, the ocean retains secrets it refuses to surrender. While some speculate she may have sunk far from any observation, others maintain that she drifts still, a testament to both human ambition and nature's uncontested authority. The lack of resolution continues to haunt both maritime professionals and enthusiasts, offering no closure and endless speculation. The Lyubov Orlova lingers in memory and record alike, a vessel swallowed by the Atlantic yet refusing to be forgotten. The Atlantic drifter, MV Alta. Radar operators first noticed the MV Alta drifting aimlessly across a stretch of the Atlantic, a vessel that appeared intact yet entirely devoid of crew. From a distance, the ship seemed as though it had simply been left to the mercy of the currents, moving slowly through open water without command or purpose. Cargo ships of this size are rarely seen alone in such a state, and the sight immediately raised questions among mariners familiar with the constant traffic that normally defines the world's busiest ocean routes. A mid-sized cargo vessel built for long commercial voyages, the Alta had spent years transporting freight between international ports before its final journey began. Ships of its class are designed to endure heavy seas and long stretches of isolation, their steel hulls and reinforced structures capable of surviving conditions that would cripple smaller vessels. Even so, a ship of this scale is never intended to travel without its crew, and the idea of one drifting freely across the Atlantic contradicted the fundamental order of modern maritime navigation. The chain of events that created this strange voyage began in October 2018. While sailing from Greece toward Haiti, the vessel suffered a serious mechanical failure that left it powerless in the open ocean. With the engines disabled and the ship unable to maneuver safely, the crew issued a distress call as the vessel drifted closer to the waters surrounding Bermuda. Rescue arrived from the United States Coast Guard, whose aircraft located the disabled cargo ship and evacuated the 10 crew members stranded aboard. Each sailor was lifted to safety, leaving the ship itself behind as an empty hull floating in the Atlantic. In most maritime emergencies, abandoned vessels are quickly recovered or towed away before they can become hazards to navigation, but the Alta would prove unusually resistant to such intervention. Decks appeared undisturbed, cargo remained secured, and the ship itself showed little outward damage despite the failure of its engines. Lifeboats were still in place, personal belongings remained scattered across cabins, and the overall condition suggested the crew had departed in an orderly rescue rather than in panic. Everything indicated that the ship had been left behind suddenly yet carefully, its systems intact but its ability to move under power completely gone. Initial efforts were made to recover the vessel, but salvage attempts quickly became complicated by weather and the ship's drifting position in open water. Without propulsion and with no crew aboard to assist with navigation, the cargo ship slipped gradually beyond the reach of towing vessels. One attempt after another faltered as the Atlantic currents carried the ship farther away from the region where it had first been abandoned. Ocean current patterns in the North Atlantic are powerful and complex, capable of transporting floating debris across enormous distances over time. Once the Alta fell fully under the influence of these currents, its course was determined not by navigation charts but by wind and water alone. The ship began a slow, silent migration across the ocean, drifting for months without human direction. Occasional sightings by passing vessels confirmed that the ghost ship remained afloat. Sailors reported glimpsing the cargo vessel at unexpected locations along shipping routes, its rusted hull and quiet decks giving it an unsettling presence on the horizon. Each sighting suggested the same unsettling fact. The ship was still travelling, still moving across vast distances without anyone aboard to guide it. As the months passed, maritime observers realised the ship had embarked on one of the longest unmanned ocean drifts recorded in modern times. The Atlantic carried the vessel thousands of miles from its original position, pushing it gradually toward the northeastern edge of the ocean basin. No engines ran within its hull, no crew watched from its bridge, and yet the ship continued its slow journey as if following a path written into the sea itself. For nearly 2 years, the cargo vessel remained adrift, exposed to storms, waves, and the constant grinding force of salt water against steel. Most abandoned ships eventually break apart or sink under such punishment, but the Alta persisted. Its reinforced hull and sturdy construction allowed it to endure conditions that might have destroyed weaker vessels long before. The voyage finally ended in February 2020, when Storm Dennis swept across the North Atlantic with powerful winds and surging waves. Driven by the storm's immense force, the drifting cargo ship was pushed toward the coastline of Ireland. There, near Ballycotton in County Cork, the long-abandoned vessel ran aground against the rocky shore. Residents and local authorities were stunned to discover the strange visitor resting against the cliffs. After nearly 2 years of wandering the Atlantic without a crew, the cargo ship had arrived silently on a distant coast. Its rusted exterior and battered structure bore the marks of the ocean's relentless currents, yet the vessel itself remained largely intact. The unexpected grounding transformed the drifting cargo ship into a symbol of the ocean's unpredictable power. Photographs of the stranded vessel spread quickly, capturing the eerie image of a modern cargo ship that had crossed an entire ocean unmanned. Maritime observers studied the ship's path and drift patterns, but even with satellite tracking and oceanographic data, its exact route across the Atlantic could only be partially reconstructed. For sailors and maritime historians, the journey of the Alta remains one of the most unusual ghost ship stories of the modern era. Unlike the abandoned sailing ships of earlier centuries, this vessel drifted through an age of satellites, radar, and constant monitoring of the seas. Yet despite the technology that now surrounds global shipping, a silent cargo ship still managed to travel thousands of miles without guidance or control. The MV Alta completed a journey no crew could have planned, carried across an ocean by currents that left behind a drifting ship and an enduring maritime mystery. The silent yacht, Kaz II. Coastal observers monitoring waters off Queensland noticed an unusual sight in April 2007 when a white catamaran later identified as the Kaz II was observed drifting slowly across open water with no visible crew on deck. The yacht moved steadily under its own power, the sails set and the hull responding to the wind as if someone remained at the helm, yet the decks appeared empty. From a distance, the vessel looked ordinary, another recreational boat navigating the calm waters of the Coral Sea, but its slow wandering course and the absence of any visible activity soon raised concern among those watching from shore and nearby vessels. When a rescue vessel finally came alongside and stepped aboard the yacht, the quietness inside immediately signalled that something deeply abnormal had taken place. No one answered calls from the deck, and no footsteps approached from the cabin below. The wheel stood unattended, gently shifting with the motion of the sea. Everything about the vessel suggested it had not been abandoned for long. Equipment was still running, lines were secured properly, and nothing on deck showed signs of damage or panic. Yet the 3 men known to be sailing aboard had vanished without leaving any visible trace of their departure. Inside the small cabin, investigators encountered a strangely ordinary scene in which plates, utensils, and freshly prepared food remained arranged, as though a meal had only just begun. Personal belongings rested where they had been placed earlier in the voyage, and the interior showed no signs of disturbance. A laptop computer remained powered on nearby, its screen still active as though someone had been using it shortly before the vessel was discovered. Charts and equipment lay in their usual positions, reinforcing the sense that daily routines aboard the yacht had simply paused rather than ended in chaos. Further inspection revealed that the vessel itself was still operational, with the engine engaged and the sails positioned in a way that suggested the yacht had been actively underway not long before it was discovered. Navigation systems remained powered, and the catamaran continued moving across the water in a slow, controlled path. The arrangement of the sails indicated that someone had recently adjusted them to maintain the yacht's course, while the autopilot system appeared to be keeping the vessel steady in the absence of a helmsman. For investigators, this detail deepened the mystery. A functioning vessel properly configured for sailing should have required constant supervision, yet the helm stood empty, and the surrounding sea offered no sign of the missing crew. 3 experienced sailors had departed together on the voyage: owner and skipper Derek Batten, along with companions Peter Tunstead and James Tunstead. Batten, a 56-year-old businessman from Western Australia, had recently purchased the yacht and planned to sail it north along the Australian coast. The Tunstead cousins had joined him for the trip, bringing with them their own sailing experience. Nothing in their background suggested recklessness or inexperience at sea. Friends and family later described the journey as a routine coastal voyage undertaken by capable sailors who understood the responsibilities of navigating open water. Radio communications and coastal sightings provided investigators with a partial timeline showing that the yacht had been progressing normally through Australian waters in the days before its discovery. The vessel had departed Eerily Beach earlier in April and was expected to continue along the Queensland coast. Contact with maritime authorities and nearby vessels revealed no distress calls and no reports of mechanical trouble. Weather conditions during that period were generally calm, with no severe storms capable of forcing an immediate evacuation. From all available evidence, the voyage appeared to have unfolded without incident until the moment the crew disappeared. Investigators examining the vessel searched carefully for evidence of mechanical failure, violent struggle, or sudden weather events that might explain how the crew vanished without leaving a distress call. Safety equipment remained aboard, including life jackets and emergency gear that sailors would normally take with them in an evacuation. The yacht's dinghy was still secured in place, and no damage to the hull or rigging indicated a collision or catastrophic accident. One theory considered by investigators suggested that a fishing line trailing behind the boat might have become tangled in the rudder or propeller. If one sailor had leaned over the stern to free the line and fallen into the water, the others might have rushed to help, potentially leaving the vessel temporarily unattended in the confusion. Additional observations noted that the interior of the cabin appeared recently occupied, with cups containing remnants of beverages and items such as jackets draped casually over chairs. This reinforced the impression that whatever occurred happened in an instant. The yacht's navigational plot showed that the vessel had been maintaining a steady course even after the crew's disappearance, leaving a trail of evidence that baffled investigators. The seamless continuation of movement without human intervention suggested a phenomenon that, while mundane in physics, was unnerving in context, given the absence of any traceable action by the crew. Even after detailed investigation and numerous attempts to reconstruct the events on board, the disappearance of the 3 men from the Kaz II remains unresolved. Maritime investigators concluded that the most plausible scenario involved an accidental chain of events that somehow drew all 3 sailors away from the vessel at once. yet no direct evidence confirmed this explanation. The yacht itself contained no clear record of what had occurred during those final moments, and the sea offered no witnesses who might clarify the sequence of events. The silent catamaran continued drifting through calm Australian waters, carrying with it the quiet trace of a voyage whose final moments were never witnessed. The War of 1812. Phantom Anne. Tvekken Dorsia. Young Teaser. The young Teaser earned her reputation as a nimble privateer, darting between merchant convoys with precision that unnerved the British Navy. Her design prioritised speed and agility, allowing her to slip past blockades and strike suddenly before disappearing into the fog. From the outset, the schooner was destined for a career marked by danger, daring, and ultimately legend. Commissioned in 1812 amid the conflict of the War of 1812, she operated under the British blockade of American ports, preying on merchant vessels while eluding capture with astonishing skill. Her sailors, handpicked for skill and daring, moved with practiced coordination, aware that every decision at sea could mean survival or disaster. Discipline and experience defined their operations, from handling sails in heavy winds to navigating the unpredictable currents off the Canadian coast. Each crew member understood the precarious nature of privateering, where opportunity and threat were inseparably intertwined. Records indicate that the schooner carried a mixed complement of local seamen and those recruited from American ports, chosen for both courage and familiarity with coastal waters. Without warning, a catastrophic fire erupted in the powder magazine, detonating with such force that the schooner was torn apart almost instantly. The explosion annihilated most of the crew, leaving behind fragments of wood and scattered cargo. Observers from the shore reported flames leaping high into the night sky, while the sea briefly boiled with debris. Accounts describe how the blast was audible from miles away, a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the surrounding coastline and linger in the memory of those who heard it. Fragments of wooden rigging drifted across the waves, while smoke and flames painted the sky above the coast of Nova Scotia. Survivors of nearby vessels struggled to comprehend the sudden devastation, witnessing a ship vanish in an instant where moments before it had moved with purposeful intent. The violent destruction created an immediate and lasting impression of incomprehensible loss, compounded by the schooner's prior reputation for audacious escapes and daring raids. Reports soon emerged of a ship appearing where none should have existed, a schooner unmistakably resembling the young Teaser, yet entirely devoid of life. Witnesses claimed to see her gliding along the waters months and even years after the explosion, sometimes appearing near familiar fishing routes or distant sandbanks. Each sighting reinforced the tale of a vessel caught between history and the spectral unknown. Many described her at twilight, moving silently against the horizon, as though she had resumed the voyages interrupted by catastrophe. Witnesses described a vessel gliding silently through fog and twilight, its sails taut and movements deliberate despite the absence of crew. Some noted a faint glimmer of lantern light, flickering as though someone navigated below decks. Others spoke of hearing the subtle creak of timbers or the flutter of canvas, sensations that suggested presence but defied logic. In several accounts, observers reported that the schooner's approach seemed deliberate, as if tracing the same paths along the Nova Scotia coast that she'd frequented in life. Local fishermen and sailors recounted encounters in hushed tones, often refusing to venture near the reported path of the phantom ship. Superstitions mixed with apprehension as seasoned mariners debated whether they had glimpsed a hallucination, a trick of the fog, or the ship itself. Stories spread through coastal towns, carrying both fear and fascination across generations. Some families claimed the ghostly vessel had appeared near their fishing grounds so consistently that entire crews avoided those waters, treating the apparition with both reverence and dread. Maritime historians considered optical illusions, mirages, and reflections of distant lights, yet none could fully account for multiple consistent sightings over decades. Contemporary accounts, including log entries, letters, and newspaper reports, corroborated the recurring appearance of a schooner matching the young Teaser's description. Observers spanning years documented similar positions, angles, and behaviour, suggesting more than coincidence. Despite scrutiny and attempts at explanation, the sightings remained inexplicable, solidifying her reputation as a spectral enigma of the Atlantic. Some explanations pointed to natural phenomena such as St. Elmo's fire, or unusual currents that could create the illusion of a ghostly vessel. Others noted the potential for overactive imaginations among fishermen who had witnessed the devastating explosion firsthand. Yet the consistency and detail of the reports, coupled with accounts of sailors unfamiliar with the schooner, argued against simple optical or psychological causes. Every recorded sighting seemed to echo the schooner's final night, preserving a moment of catastrophe across decades. Her brief, violent career remains etched in maritime memory, and the apparition continues to glide along the Atlantic coast, defying explanation and expectation. Each report, whether skeptical or sincere, contributes to a legacy of intrigue, blending historical fact with enduring legend. Maritime museums in Nova Scotia reference the young teaser as an example of a vessel whose story bridged life, death, and myth, while historical societies maintain files of eyewitness accounts that continue to intrigue researchers. The schooner drifts still in collective memory and coastal waters, a phantom reminder that some catastrophes linger beyond the limits of time and reason. The Eternal Sailor, Flying Dutchman. Maritime folklore is crowded with stories of storms, wrecks, and vanished crews, yet few legends have endured with the same quiet persistence as the tale of a ship that never returns to port. For centuries, sailors navigating the trade routes around southern Africa spoke of a lone vessel glimpsed through fog or distant squalls, its rigging taut and its sails set as though commanded by unseen hands. Somewhere within those shifting accounts appears the name that would become inseparable from the legend itself, the Flying Dutchman, a vessel said to roam the oceans without a living crew, condemned to wander the sea for eternity. The earliest written references to this phantom ship surfaced in the late 18th century, when maritime culture was steeped in superstition, born from long voyages and uncertain horizons. By the 1790s, travel accounts and sailors' journals circulating through European ports described a spectral ship sighted near the treacherous waters surrounding the Cape of Good Hope. These reports did not always agree on the ship's exact appearance, yet they shared certain unsettling similarities. Witnesses described a fully rigged vessel pressing into fierce winds that should have driven any ordinary ship backward, its masts intact and its course unwavering even as storms lashed the sea around it. According to the most widely repeated version of the legend, the origin of the Flying Dutchman lies in a voyage undertaken during the height of European maritime expansion. The story centres on a Dutch captain, often identified in later retellings as Bernard Fokker, or sometimes as a figure named Hendrik van der Decken. In these accounts, the captain attempts to round the Cape of Good Hope during a violent storm, refusing to turn back despite the danger that threatened his crew and ship alike. As the winds rose and the waves grew violent enough to shatter timbers, the captain reportedly swore that he would sail around the Cape even if it meant continuing until the end of time. What follows in the legend transforms a difficult voyage into a maritime curse. Some versions claim the captain uttered a blasphemous oath against God, sealing his fate in that moment. Others suggest that the ship was punished for arrogance and defiance in the face of the sea's power. In each telling, the outcome is the same. The vessel becomes trapped between life and ruin, condemned to sail the oceans endlessly without ever reaching harbour again. Although the supernatural elements belong to folklore, the legend itself emerged from a maritime world where such stories were taken seriously. Long before the era of radio communication and satellite navigation, sailors often travelled months across vast, unpredictable waters. Storms could destroy ships in minutes, and vessels occasionally vanished without leaving any trace behind. In that uncertain environment, the idea of a ship continuing its voyage long after its crew had perished was not entirely unimaginable. By the early 19th century, reports of sightings had begun appearing in newspapers and travel journals. Sailors claimed to have seen a distant ship glowing faintly against storm clouds, or appearing briefly in lightning flashes before disappearing again. One of the most famous alleged encounters occurred in 1881, when officers aboard the British training ship HMS Baychimo recorded an unusual sighting near the Cape of Good Hope. Among those aboard the vessel at the time was the young naval cadet who would later become George V. According to the ship's log and later recollections, a strange red glow appeared on the horizon, illuminating what several sailors believed to be the rigging of a phantom ship. The report did not describe a clearly visible vessel sailing past them, but the eerie light and the outline glimpsed through mist quickly fueled speculation that the legendary Dutchman had appeared once again. The event became even more unsettling to those who later repeated the story, because one of the sailors who first spotted the light reportedly died the following day after falling from the mast. In the minds of many sailors, the Flying Dutchman was more than a ghostly curiosity. It was considered a terrible omen. Throughout the 19th century, maritime folklore surrounding the phantom ship spread far beyond the waters of southern Africa. Merchant crews crossing the Atlantic and Indian Oceans carried the story between ports, each retelling, adding small details that blurred the boundary between rumour and observation. Some sailors insisted the ship sailed with ragged sails glowing faintly in moonlight. Others described a vessel moving directly against the wind as though the laws of the sea no longer applied. The persistence of these accounts fascinated historians and folklorists because they emerged from different crews and ships separated by years or even decades. Yet the descriptions often returned to the same core idea: a fully rigged vessel apparently under sail moving silently through the darkness without a visible crew. No voices carried across the water, no lanterns moved along the deck, and no signal flags were raised. Many scholars now view the Flying Dutchman as a powerful example of how maritime culture transformed real dangers into enduring legends. The waters around the Cape of Good Hope are notorious for violent storms created by the meeting of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. In such conditions, optical illusions known as superior mirages can distort distant ships, lifting their images above the horizon and giving them strange, floating shapes. A vessel seen through heavy fog or refracted light could easily appear unnatural, especially to sailors already familiar with the legend. Yet the rational explanations have never entirely erased the story's hold on imagination. The image of a ship forever crossing the horizon without its crew remains one of the most haunting symbols in maritime folklore. Even in the modern era, occasional reports still surface from sailors who claim to have glimpsed an inexplicable vessel moving through distant fog or storm clouds. Whether born from mirages, misunderstood sightings, or centuries of storytelling, the legend of the Flying Dutchman persists because it captures a deeper fear that has always accompanied life at sea. Ships are meant to carry people safely across the water, guided by human hands and judgment. A vessel that continues sailing after those hands are gone represents something profoundly unsettling, as though the sea itself has claimed command of the ship. Somewhere beyond the horizon, sailors once believed, the Flying Dutchman was still out there, sails full, helm steady, and not a single living soul aboard to guide its endless voyage. The Vanishing Channel Trader, Resolven. The busy shipping lanes of the Bristol Channel rarely allowed a vessel to drift unnoticed for long. During the late 19th century, the waters between Wales and the wider Atlantic formed one of the most active maritime corridors in Europe, crowded with merchant brigs carrying coal, timber and manufactured goods from the industrial ports of Britain to distant markets. Ships crossed these routes daily, their sails rising and falling along the horizon as they moved between the coal harbours of South Wales and the open sea. Yet, in August of 1884, one vessel moving quietly across those familiar waters drew attention for a far stranger reason than damaged rigging or a signal of distress. The ship was sailing normally, but there was no visible sign of anyone aboard the brig known as the Resolven. On a calm morning when visibility stretched clearly across the channel, sailors aboard another vessel noticed the brig maintaining its course under full sail. The observing ship, the Mallard, had been navigating the busy waters when its crew first spotted the silent trader in the distance. At first glance, the vessel appeared seaworthy and properly handled, the canvas taut against the wind and the masts standing firm above the deck. But something about the scene soon felt wrong to the men watching through spyglasses. No movement could be seen along the railings, no crew members adjusted the lines or checked the horizon. The deck remained strangely still as the ship continued gliding across the water. Concern grew as the Mallard's sailors studied the vessel more closely. In a region where ships frequently hailed one another or signalled their presence, the brig offered no response. No voices carried across the water, and no signal flags were raised to acknowledge nearby traffic. The silence of the ship became increasingly difficult to ignore. After several unanswered attempts to attract attention, the decision was made to approach and investigate the strange vessel. When the sailors finally boarded the drifting brig, the scene that greeted them was not the aftermath of a violent disaster, but something far more unsettling. The deck showed no signs of struggle or severe damage. The rigging remained neatly arranged, and the sails were still drawing wind exactly as they should have been during an ordinary voyage. Everything about the ship suggested that its journey had been continuing without interruption. Yet the moment the boarding party began searching the vessel, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. Inside the cabins and narrow passageways below deck, everyday objects remained in place as though the crew had only recently stepped away. Personal belongings were still stored in their quarters. Equipment necessary for navigation had not been scattered or damaged, and nothing appeared to have been hastily abandoned. Even more puzzling was the absence of any visible attempt to evacuate the ship. Lifeboats that would normally be used during an emergency were still secured where they belonged, hanging quietly along the sides of the vessel. Shipping records later confirmed that the Resolven had departed from the Welsh port of Cardiff earlier that month. During the 1880s, Cardiff stood among the most important coal-exporting ports in the world, sending fuel from the industrial valleys of South Wales across the Atlantic and beyond. Vessels like the Resolven were part of the steady maritime traffic that fueled global industry. The captain and crew were experienced sailors accustomed to navigating the shifting tides and narrow waters of the Bristol Channel, and nothing in the ship's departure records suggested trouble or unusual circumstances. Yet somewhere along the short stretch of water between Cardiff and the open sea, every member of the crew had disappeared. The vessel itself continued sailing long enough to be spotted and boarded, its course seemingly unchanged by the absence of those who had commanded it. Investigators searching for answers quickly realized that the ship offered very few clues. There were no signs of piracy or robbery, cargo remained undisturbed, and no evidence suggested that outsiders had boarded the vessel. The ship's structure was intact, with no major damage that might explain a sudden emergency. Storms capable of sweeping sailors overboard sometimes struck the Bristol Channel, but such events usually left traces of chaos on deck or damaged equipment scattered across the vessel. In the case of the Resolven, nothing appeared out of place. Speculation spread quickly through the ports along the Welsh coast. Some sailors wondered whether a sudden accident had forced the crew into the water, leaving the vessel unmanned while the wind carried it forward. Others suggested the possibility of illness, mutiny, or an unknown threat that had driven the crew to abandon ship despite the absence of visible danger. Yet none of these theories could explain why the lifeboats remained aboard, nor why no nearby ships had reported rescuing stranded sailors. The mystery grew even deeper because of the crowded waters in which the ship had been found. The Bristol Channel was not an isolated stretch of ocean, but a corridor filled with merchant traffic moving between British ports and the Atlantic trade routes. If the crew had abandoned the ship or fallen overboard, the chances of another vessel noticing them would have been high. Yet no reports of survivors, wreckage, or bodies ever surfaced in the days that followed. Maritime historians studying the incident later noted that the sea has always possessed the unsettling ability to erase human presence without leaving clear explanations behind. Even in well-travelled waters, a sudden accident or unexpected event could remove an entire crew before anyone else had the chance to witness it. But the case of the Resolven stood apart from most maritime disappearances because the ship itself survived intact, drifting quietly through the same waters where its crew had once worked. The discovery created an image that lingered in the memories of those who first stepped onto its silent deck. A fully functioning vessel had continued its journey across the channel exactly as it had before, guided only by wind and current. The ropes were tied, the sails were steady, and the ship responded to the sea as though nothing had changed. Yet the Resolven kept moving across the water exactly as it had before, carrying its silent mystery through the channel without a single sailor left to guide it. The schooner left adrift, Zabrina. Amid the tense maritime traffic of the First World War, the waters of the English Channel had become a place where merchant vessels sailed cautiously, aware that unseen dangers could appear without warning. German U-boats prowled these narrow corridors, striking swiftly and leaving little time for reaction. Tides shifted unpredictably, fog could roll in without notice, and wind patterns across the channel often changed in minutes, making every voyage a test of skill and vigilance. Sailors moving coal, timber, and other essential cargo were trained to anticipate danger, but even the most experienced crews could be caught off guard. In October 1917, amidst this precarious balance between vigilance and hazard, a drifting vessel was spotted near the French coast. The sight was immediately unsettling. The barge's sails were still fully set, yet there was no visible crew aboard. It was later identified as the Zabrina. The initial sighting came from the deck of a French patrol vessel operating out of Cherbourg, tasked with monitoring shipping in the wartime channel. Observers noted the schooner moving steadily with the wind, the canvas taut and the wooden masts unyielding but eerily empty. In a busy stretch of water where ships frequently crossed paths, the stillness on the Zabrina's deck was immediately suspicious. There were no flags raised, no signals exchanged, and no response to hails from nearby vessels. The silence seemed almost deliberate, as though the sea itself had swallowed the human presence from the barge. French authorities boarded the vessel with caution, expecting to find survivors or at least evidence of an attack. The deck revealed an unsettling calm. The rigging was secure, ropes coiled and tensioned, while the sails continued to billow with the wind. Cargo, several tons of coal packed for delivery, remained intact in the hold, its dust and coal scent drifting faintly across the deck. The wooden planks of the barge were worn by years of service, the grain visible beneath weathered varnish, yet the surface was orderly, with no scattered tools or broken equipment to suggest a hasty evacuation. Lifeboats were still in position, secured along the sides, their oars neatly stowed. Nothing about the scene indicated panic, struggle, or violence. Below the deck, in the cabins and crew quarters, the impression of routine remained. Personal effects were undisturbed, navigational tools lay where the crew would have left them, and logbooks and charts were still in place. The lack of disruption suggested the crew had vanished without warning. Even the wheel and tiller, instruments essential for steering, were unmanned, yet the schooner maintained a straight course under wind alone. The physical order of the ship, combined with the complete absence of those who should have been aboard, created a tension that left the boarding party unsettled. Records confirmed that the Zabrina had departed from the English port of Falmouth several days prior, carrying coal for Saint-Brieuc. Falmouth was a busy harbour even during wartime, and vessels leaving with cargoes like coal were subject to routine inspections and standard wartime protocols. The crossing should have been straightforward, a short voyage familiar to the crew, who were accustomed to reading tides and winds along the channel. Nothing in the ship's departure log suggested irregularity or misfortune, yet somewhere along the way the sailors vanished. Because the channel crossing was relatively short, the disappearance was particularly perplexing. Even in wartime, when the seas were patrolled and accidents could happen, a vessel drifting unattended would normally attract attention long before reaching French waters. Weather records indicate that the conditions during the Zabrina's voyage were largely calm, with no significant storms capable of causing sudden evacuation. Visibility was good, yet the ship had remained unassisted and unmanned for the duration of its drift. The more officials considered the case, the more inexplicable it became. Speculation among local authorities and nearby ports ran the gamut of possibilities. Some suggested that a German submarine may have intercepted the schooner, forcing the crew overboard, but no records of an engagement in that sector exist. Others proposed that a sudden accident or onboard illness could have incapacitated the crew, yet this theory offered no explanation for the undisturbed cargo, the intact lifeboats, or the smooth sailing of the vessel. Every hypothesis faced inconsistencies, reinforcing the impression that this was no ordinary wartime disappearance. The wartime environment itself only intensified the mystery. In 1917, ships crossing the channel were constantly alert to the threat of mines, submarines, and fast-moving patrols. Merchant vessels often had strict signalling procedures, watch rotations, and emergency drills designed to prevent loss of life. In the case of the Zabrina, none of these protocols appears to have been enacted. The schooner maintained a normal course as if nothing had occurred, yet the people who should have been navigating it were nowhere to be found. The contrast between human absence and mechanical order amplified the eerie quality of the discovery. Maritime historians have noted that while ship losses were common during the First World War, most were the result of identifiable attacks or accidents. The Zabrina stands apart because it remained fully intact and operational, yet utterly unmanned. The sight of a functional vessel drifting in heavily patrolled waters, with no human crew to guide it, was both unprecedented and deeply unsettling. Even the simplest explanations, storm, accident, or enemy action, failed to account for the complete absence of those who should have been aboard. Investigators left the vessel with an image that lingered long after the schooner was towed into port, The sails still held wind, the hull cut steadily through the water, and the cargo remained precisely where it had been loaded. All signs pointed toward a journey continuing as it had begun, yet there was no one to steer, no one to adjust sails, no one to make the countless small decisions required to navigate the channel. The barge, for all practical purposes, seemed alive while its crew had disappeared entirely. The Zabrina continued drifting through wartime waters as though nothing had happened, carrying the quiet absence of its crew across the channel. The Phantom of the English Channel, Lady Lovibond. Mist and salt spray roll over the Goodwin Sands, where tides shift relentlessly and every year claim new vessels along the treacherous shoals. Mariners have long feared these waters, known for their shallow sandbanks that stretch miles offshore and shift with every storm and tide. The sands themselves are deceptive, sometimes hidden beneath deceptively calm waters, and at other times exposed in ways that make navigation perilous, even for the most experienced sailors. Among the countless wrecks here, one vessel stands apart not for the destruction it wrought, but for a legend that continues to haunt these waters, the Lady Lovibond. In 1748, the Lady Lovibond set sail from its home port, carrying passengers and cargo destined for the continent. Historical records confirm that the schooner was captained by Simon Taylor and had aboard both friends and family attending a celebratory voyage marking a wedding. The ship had left safe harbour under favourable weather, yet as it approached the notorious Goodwin Sands, a combination of shifting tides and navigational miscalculation caused it to run aground. Despite the efforts to free the vessel, the Lady Lovibond was lost to the sands, and all aboard perished. The tragedy was widely reported in contemporary newspapers, but it was the unusual circumstances of the wreck, its suddenness during calm conditions, that seeded the legend to come. The wreck left behind more than wood and iron. It became the foundation for stories whispered among mariners, tales of a ship that could not rest even after its destruction. Sailors passing through the channel spoke of ghostly sails glimpsed in foggy mornings, of a vessel appearing on the horizon, pristine and intact, even decades after its sinking. These accounts, while sporadic, were persistent enough to warrant attention. The Lady Lovibond, though lost to the sands, seemed to have acquired a second existence, one that defied ordinary explanation and continued to capture the imagination of those who navigated these waters. Over the following centuries, fishermen and channel pilots reported glimpses of the Lady Lovibond, appearing fully intact, sails unfurled, and yet entirely devoid of life or crew. Descriptions in local newspapers and maritime logs often emphasize its sudden appearance, sometimes near the same point of its original wreck. Witnesses describe a white hull and 3 masts rising sharply from the mist, cutting through the waves as though the ship had emerged from another time. Despite the passage of decades, the accounts are consistent in noting the absence of any human presence aboard, adding an eerie dimension to the story that has become intertwined with the history of the Goodwin Sands. Each sighting shares peculiar consistencies. The same 3-masted silhouette, the distinct white hull, and the stillness of its decks that seems almost unnatural amid the churning waters. Weather conditions are usually calm, yet the ship moves as if guided by unseen hands, navigating treacherous currents and hidden shoals with unnerving precision. Some mariners have reported feeling an inexplicable chill when the ship passes, or hearing the faint creak of wood that seems to echo the ghostly lives of the crew lost centuries earlier. The repetition of these elements across reports lends the story an unsettling plausibility while maintaining its mystery. The timing of its appearances appears strangely regular, with decades separating reports suggesting a pattern or rhythm that no natural explanation has yet clarified. According to tradition, the Lady Lovibond emerges roughly every 50 years, a cycle that has been noted in maritime records and local folklore alike. Sightings in the late 18th century, the early 19th century, and again in the mid-20th century suggest a pattern that has persisted despite the changes in maritime technology, shipping routes, and the density of traffic across the channel. Even with modern navigation and radar, the legend of the ship continues to hold a spectral place in the collective consciousness of sailors and coastal communities. Those who have seen the ship speak of an uncanny calm surrounding it, a silence so complete that the usual roar of wind and waves feels momentarily suspended. Observers describe an almost surreal stillness, where the vessel glides forward without the creaking rigging or calls of sailors one would expect from a functioning ship. The Lady Lovibond seems to exist both in and outside of time, appearing for a brief moment before vanishing into fog or fading over the horizon. The unearthly tranquility surrounding the ship is contrasted sharply by the surrounding waters, which are often turbulent, emphasizing the unnatural nature of its appearance. Maritime records, newspapers, and local law converge to give the Lady Lovibond a presence that transcends ordinary shipwreck legend, a ghostly vessel anchored in memory as much as in the channel itself. While no direct physical evidence remains, no remains of the hull or recovered artifacts from post-wreck sightings, the consistency of eyewitness accounts provides an intriguing body of circumstantial evidence. Scholars of maritime folklore note that while many ships are remembered in legend, few carry the precise combination of historical grounding, repeated observation, and sensory detail that the Lady Lovibond does, reinforcing its enduring reputation as a phantom ship. The Lady Lovibond endures in legend and in maritime reports, a ship bound not by geography or the sea, but by the rhythm of a 50-year cycle that continues to confound explanation. Its appearances are fleeting, yet the impact lingers, leaving those who witness it with a persistent sense of unease. Across centuries, the ship's ghostly journey has become a testament to the power of maritime memory and the enduring mysteries of the channel's shifting sands. Every 50 years, the Lady Lovibond emerges from the mist, a phantom of the sands that vanishes before any hand can touch it. The Resolute, HMS Resolute. Months before it was abandoned, the HMS Resolute had set out from England as part of a larger expedition carrying supplies and experienced officers tasked with navigating uncharted Arctic waters. Designed for polar conditions, the ship boasted reinforced timbers and a sturdy hull meant to withstand crushing ice. Yet even these preparations could not fully counter the hazards of a frozen sea. The vessel moved with care, attempting to chart the elusive passages of the Canadian Arctic, where shifting ice, hidden shoals, and unpredictable weather posed constant danger. Every decision carried the weight of life and death, and the Resolute, though robust, was soon caught in forces far beyond human control. Even with reinforced hulls and careful planning, the ship soon became trapped by shifting ice floes, forcing the crew into a precarious struggle for survival. Over days, the ice pressed relentlessly against the sides, creaking and groaning as the frozen expanse tightened its grip. Officers monitored the strain carefully, knowing that the frozen waters could crush even a well-built ship in moments. Supply lines were rationed, and sentries watched the horizon for any sign of open water, yet there was none. The cold was merciless, penetrating every layer of clothing, while the Arctic silence magnified the sense of isolation that enveloped the crew. Evacuation was ordered with meticulous precision, lifeboats lowered and supplies distributed, leaving the vessel behind to the relentless pull of the polar seas. Sailors departed reluctantly, their footsteps fading onto the ice as the ship was abandoned. Every rope coiled, every hatch secured, and the last officer ensured that the Resolute was left, in a state fit to survive, yet it was understood that the frozen sea could still claim the vessel. The Arctic winds swept across the ice fields, carrying the abandoned ship farther from human reach, a ghostly silhouette in a world of endless white. When the Resolute was later sighted adrift, it seemed to float with a quiet, almost deliberate purpose, its decks empty but rigging taut, as though still responding to hands no longer there. Observers described the ship as moving with a steady, unbroken course, unaffected by the drifting ice and storm-churned waters around it. The absence of life aboard contrasted sharply with the controlled order of the vessel. Ropes secured, sails furled or set precisely, and the wheel unmanned yet still capable of guiding the hull. The sighting was impossible to ignore, a ship both abandoned and enduring, travelling across a frozen expanse that should have claimed it long ago. The harsh conditions of the Arctic, from ice pressure to hidden currents, should have crushed or fractured the ship, yet it endured, drifting over waters that seemed determined to claim it. Months of exposure left other vessels battered and broken, yet the Resolute persisted, carrying its timbers, rigging and stores across the polar seas as if protected by some unseen force. Navigational patterns suggest it followed currents that might have led it away from open shipping lanes and into isolation, further preserving its structure. The phenomenon puzzled naval observers, who could not explain how a ship, left unmanned, had survived months of ice, storms, and sub-zero temperatures without catastrophic damage. Upon its recovery, officers noted the vessel's condition. Logs preserved, cargo secured and the hull intact, each detail emphasizing the ship's improbable survival without human guidance. The crew who later salvaged the Resolute marvelled at the orderliness of the ship, finding charts and instruments in their proper places, as if the vessel had continued its course under careful direction. Even small details, such as the position of ropes and rigging, suggested that the ship had somehow navigated through ice and water without intervention, a feat that defied both reason and experience. The recovery was celebrated as a triumph of naval engineering, yet the unexplained drift lent the story an aura of mystery that persisted in Arctic lore. Maritime experts have long marvelled at the phenomenon, recognising that while the ice itself could carry the vessel, the precise manner of its course and preservation remains a mystery. Some have suggested that a combination of currents, wind and ice movement might have allowed the ship to drift safely, yet the consistency and integrity of the vessel make such explanations incomplete. The Resolute became a subject of fascination for polar historians, engineers and sailors alike, standing as evidence that, even in extreme isolation, a ship could move and endure in ways that challenge understanding. Its journey inspired questions about the boundaries between human control and the forces of nature. Historians reflect on the Resolute not only as a vessel, but as a symbol of resilience and the strange persistence of human engineering, even in the absence of the crew who built it. The ship's survival became a testament to meticulous construction, careful preparation, and perhaps the unknowable forces that govern motion and preservation in the polar seas. For those who study Arctic exploration, the story of the Resolute underscores the precarious balance between human endeavour and the indifferent power of the environment, leaving an enduring impression of wonder and unease. The HMS Resolute sailed across Arctic waters without a single soul aboard, a silent enigma defying both nature and expectation. The Jenny Lind, 1850s merchant ship. The Jenny Lind was a merchant vessel accustomed to the steady rhythms of 19th century trade, carrying cargo and crew along familiar routes near the South American coast. Built for long voyages, the ship transported a mixture of goods and provisions, while the crew maintained a disciplined routine of navigation, maintenance and watchkeeping. Its arrival at distant ports was anticipated by merchants and officials, yet this particular voyage would become an enduring maritime enigma, for when the ship was discovered adrift, all who had sailed her had vanished without a trace. Hands moved efficiently across the deck, adjusting ropes and tending sails, their presence once audible in the echo of footsteps and the occasional call to one another, yet now the ship remained eerily silent. The usual signs of activity, the creak of timbers under weight, the flapping of lines as sailors secured sails, had vanished, leaving only the motion of the ship itself as it cut through the water. Even small details, like a coil of rope left neatly against the rail or a bucket placed beside the capstan, suggested an abrupt departure rather than negligence or disorder. Below decks, the cargo hold was meticulously organised, crates aligned and supplies stacked with care, offering no hint of distress or disruption. Provisions remained untouched, barrels of flour and sugar secured, and bales of textiles were exactly where they had been loaded. The holds were quiet except for the occasional groan of the ship settling in the swell, yet the arrangement spoke volumes, everything prepared, yet no one there to oversee it. The meticulous condition of the cargo suggested the crew's disappearance had been sudden and inexplicable. The rigging remained taut and responsive to the wind, the deck spotless, giving the impression that invisible hands still guided the vessel. Lines ran true, sails were set in precise alignment, and the helm held steady, hinting at a strange continuity of labour without a single living sailor aboard. Sunlight glinted off polished brass fittings and carefully secured equipment, and the ship moved as if the routine actions of its crew had been frozen in time, preserved in some uncanny suspended state. Currents and waves nudged the vessel along its path, yet the unmanned ship maintained a steady course that confounded those who later encountered it. Even in the absence of human intervention, it remained afloat and surprisingly navigable, moving across open water with a composure that belied the complete lack of guidance. Mariners who later boarded her found that the sails still caught the wind and the vessel seemed to respond as it would under the hands of an experienced crew, leaving them to wonder at the forces that had carried her thus. Every detail aboard, from the secured cargo to the spotless decks, spoke of sudden absence rather than negligence, a ghostly pause in what should have been routine activity. Meals remained set in the galley, tools left where they were last used, and the bell on the quarterdeck hung silently as if waiting for a signal that would never come. The contrast between the ship's operational readiness and the void where life should have been lent an uncanny atmosphere, leaving anyone who approached with a profound sense of unease. Accounts of the discovery emphasized the impossibility of the situation. A fully prepared vessel, cargo untouched, and no crew to navigate or tend the ship. Reports from nearby sailors described a vessel seemingly abandoned in mid-action, moving along a coastal route without incident, yet entirely lacking the human presence that would normally have guided her. Even the most detailed logs could only record what was observed. The mystery of how the Jenny Lind drifted unmanned remained unresolved, and no contemporary account could explain the sudden disappearance. Though the ship eventually reached safe harbour under tow, the mystery endured, recorded in maritime logs and retold in subsequent years as a strange anomaly of the sea. The voyage of the Jenny Lind serves as a reminder that even the most ordinary vessels, carrying common cargo and ordinary lives, can become part of enduring mysteries when human presence inexplicably vanishes. The vessel drifted silently along the coast, a ship without hands to steer it, leaving the fate of its crew an enduring enigma. The Ellen Austin, 1880s cargo ship. A dark line appeared on the horizon, sails full, moving steadily as if guided by invisible hands. The crew of the approaching vessel had been scanning the Atlantic for hours, weary from the swell and wind, when the unmistakable outline of a ship drifted into view. From afar, she appeared intact and under perfect sail, her hull slicing through the water with a measured, unhurried rhythm. There was no smoke, no sign of activity, yet she advanced as though carrying a living crew, a sight that unsettled even the most seasoned sailors accustomed to the ocean's unpredictability. The name Ellen Austin was known among mariners as a sturdy cargo vessel, yet this encounter promised something far beyond the routine of commerce and navigation. Waves broke against the hull as the approaching sailors drew nearer, each creak and groan of the timbers amplified by the silence aboard. No flags signalled ownership. No figures leaned on the rails or attended to the rigging. The wind filled the sails with energy, but no one adjusted lines or called instructions. Every step along the deck of the observer's own vessel heightened the unease. The Ellen Austin seemed suspended between the ordinary and the inexplicable. Even the gulls, drawn to ships by expectation of scraps or movement, circled without landing, sensing perhaps that the vessel was different from any other they had followed. No voice called out, no footsteps echoed on the deck. The ship seemed frozen in time, motion carried solely by wind and current. The wooden planks glistened wet from the Atlantic spray, untouched by human presence. Every piece of rigging ran taut and true, sails set as if guided by invisible sailors. The wheel remained steady, the rudder aligned, suggesting that some strange continuity persisted in the ship's operation. From every perspective, the Ellen Austin appeared entirely functional, yet bereft of life, her very motion presenting a paradox. She obeyed no human hand, yet remained unnervingly controlled. Every coil of rope, every barrel and crate, remained exactly as if the crew had vanished in mid-task. The cargo hold, partially visible through open hatches, revealed neatly stacked goods that bore no sign of hurried departure. Lines for cargo handling were set, hatch covers secured and provisions untouched. The absence of disturbance spoke of a sudden departure, or perhaps an impossibility, that the ship had been left entirely uncrewed yet perfectly maintained. Small details compounded the strangeness. A rope coil lay beside the capstan, a bucket still stood ready for use, and even the binnacle housing the compass remained upright, as though awaiting a hand that would never come. Hands reached for the wheel and lines, yet no life answered the attempt to guide the vessel, leaving the explorers unsettled. Each sailor hesitated before stepping aboard, aware of the unnatural silence that enveloped the ship. Footsteps echoed strangely in the empty spaces between cabins, and the sound of water lapping against the hull became the only companion to the observer's movement. Attempts to adjust sails or anchor the ship revealed a vessel responsive only to the laws of wind and tide. She shifted predictably, yet without the touch of any human presence, reinforcing the impression that the Ellen Austin was operating under her own accord. The Atlantic swelled around the drifting ship, currents nudging her along a path impossible to predict with no one aboard. The waves carried her past reefs and shoals with an almost deliberate caution, avoiding hazards that would have felled lesser vessels. Mariners noted the eerie alignment of her course with prevailing winds, as if some unseen pilot guided her forward. Even the spray that crashed across the deck seemed choreographed, not haphazard, contributing to the impression that this was no ordinary derelict. For hours, the observing sailors kept pace, measuring her movement and the subtle motion of masts and rigging, yet found no explanation for her continued navigation. Even as they watched, the Ellen Austin pressed forward, a ghostly presence in the vast ocean. There was no way to signal, no indication of distress, and no living soul to offer guidance or explanation. She drifted past, her silhouette framed against the afternoon sky, leaving only the sound of the wind through her sails and the endless expanse of the Atlantic behind. The longer she moved untouched, the more impossible her condition seemed, a vessel fully rigged and functioning yet utterly devoid of life, a maritime paradox that would be recorded in sailors' accounts for decades. The Ellen Austin sailed on under wind and sun, a ship alive with motion yet empty of the lives that should have guided her. The Palatine, 18th century merchant vessel. Low clouds hung over the Irish Sea, and a solitary silhouette moved steadily through the mist, sails taut and the deck unnervingly quiet. Sailors aboard a nearby vessel first spotted her in the grey dawn, a merchant ship drifting with purpose yet without a single figure tending her rigging or calling instructions. The Palatine had been a common sight in trade routes, carrying timber, barrels, and various goods between ports, but this particular voyage presented an enigma. Every indication of life had vanished, leaving only the outward appearance of routine activity. Her sails caught the wind perfectly, and the hull cut through the swell with the calm precision of a vessel under command, yet no human hand guided her onward. As the discovering sailors drew closer, the subtle motion of the vessel betrayed no human presence, only the rhythm of wind and tide. The deck was immaculate, ropes coiled and lines taut, every detail suggesting care and discipline, yet every signal of life, shouts, footsteps, the movement of men, was absent. The fog softened edges and obscured some details, amplifying the unnerving quiet that seemed to envelop the ship. Each approach brought a new realization. The Palatine functioned as if crewed, but none could be seen, heard, or felt. Timber groaned beneath the swell, yet no footsteps followed, no voices answered, and every hatch and line remained in perfect order. The capstan stood ready for work, the anchors secured, and even the galley showed no signs of hasty departure or disarray. Every plank and fitting reflected careful maintenance, yet the life that usually animated such labour was gone. Mariners whispered to one another, noting the impossibility of a ship so prepared and yet so utterly empty, a ghost in mid-motion across open water. Within the hold, crates and barrels stood precisely as they had been loaded, untouched, while the faint scent of salt and tar lingered in the air. Timber for export, casks of provisions, and tightly bound cargo remained aligned with the discipline of a crew that had vanished without warning. The absence of disturbance suggested that the Palatine had not suffered attack or misfortune, but rather that her human occupants had disappeared suddenly and inexplicably. Every layer of detail, cargo, deck, rigging, pointed to the same chilling conclusion. The crew had left no trace, yet the ship continued to sail as if guided by invisible hands. The wheel and rudder responded smoothly to the current, as if the ship's course had been memorized and carried out by some unseen hand. Sails were properly trimmed to catch the wind, lines ran true, and the vessel moved with deliberate efficiency, drifting along a predictable path despite the absence of those who should have steered her. Sailors attempted to board cautiously, some holding onto rails and peering into cabins, yet every move only reinforced the strangeness. A vessel fully operational without a soul aboard. Their own voices seemed swallowed by the fog, leaving the only sounds as wind, creaking timbers, and the steady rhythm of waves against the hull. Small objects, a coil of rope, a bucket, a lantern, remained exactly where last placed, suggesting the crew had vanished in mid-task rather than departed deliberately. Tools sat beside their workstations, barrels were tightly lashed, and the bell on the quarterdeck swung gently with motion, yet produced no call to signal. Even the most ordinary details, the position of a mop leaning against a bulkhead, a hatch slightly ajar, became evidence of the abrupt and unaccountable absence that defined the Palatine. Each new observation deepened the unease, a realization that the ordinary world had been suspended on this one ghostly vessel. Even as the waves nudged the Palatine along the coast, an uncanny stillness lingered, the absence of life echoing louder than any storm or swell. Sailors maintained watch for hours, unable to account for the continuity of motion without human guidance. The ship's steady course through the Atlantic currents, combined with her perfectly set sails, created an impression of deliberate intent without any mind behind it. Attempts to alter her course or tow her revealed only the persistence of her autonomous drift, a phenomenon that seemed to defy explanation grounded in ordinary seamanship. The Palatine continued to drift, sails full and deck pristine, carrying the silent mystery of its vanished crew across the grey expanse of the Irish Sea. The schooner Surprise, 1920s fishing vessel. Waves slashed against the hull as the schooner moved steadily, nets hauling themselves over the side with no hand to guide them. The vessel had been spotted first by a nearby fishing sloop, its motion precise and purposeful, yet the deck remained empty of life. Sails were set to catch the steady North Atlantic wind, ropes taut and creaking under tension, while the rigging swayed as though animated by invisible hands. On board, the schooner's gear operated in quiet efficiency, maintaining the rhythm of labour without a single soul to direct it, an unsettling sight for those who approached in disbelief. Sails snapped sharply in the wind, lines running taut, yet not a single voice called orders across the deck. The deck itself seemed to breathe with motion, the creak of planks beneath the unseen weight of work, the metallic groan of winches under strain, but no footsteps followed. The air carried the sharp scent of salt water and fish, mingling with tarred ropes and wet wood, forming an atmosphere both ordinary and profoundly unnatural. Observers could see nets rise and fall with the pull of unseen effort, crates rattling gently as though the crew's labour had been preserved mid-task. The winches groaned under load, creaking as if operated by unseen labourers, while crates of freshly caught fish jostled against one another. Ropes twisted around, belaying pins and blocks as though manipulated by hands invisible to the eye, and the schooner maintained a steady course, following the currents as if guided by some hidden intelligence. Each observation deepened the mystery. Here was a vessel fully functional, her purpose being carried out yet devoid of the very presence that should animate her machinery. Even experienced mariners could not reconcile the apparent normality of her operation with the impossibility of her unmanned state. Below deck, the hold was filled with ice-packed catch and neatly stacked equipment, untouched yet in constant motion, as if managed by invisible hands. Barrels of fish remained in order, crates of supplies unshifted, and the faint scent of seawater mixed with the brine of the preserved catch. Tools and coils of rope lay in exact alignment with the routines of work, yet no figure stood to supervise or adjust them. The eerie continuity of labour extended beyond mere mechanics. It suggested that every task, every motion was executed, as if the crew had somehow left instructions for themselves beyond the realm of human presence. Even the smallest details, a coil of rope, a lantern swaying from a hook, a capstan turning gently with the tide, suggested work continuing without interruption. Nets lifted with the tide, pulleys turning smoothly, and lines running true in a symphony of motion devoid of life. The schooner's consistency defied conventional explanation, with every mechanism responding to unseen influence and every task appearing complete and purposeful. Those who approached could only stare, the normal sounds of a working ship amplified by the absence of voices, footsteps, or laughter, creating an almost spectral rhythm across the deck. Sailors who attempted to board found every mechanism responsive, yet no presence to explain the bizarre autonomy of the vessel. Steps across the deck revealed nothing but the hum of taut lines and groaning timber. Attempts to interact with the winches or nets produced only expected results, as though the machinery itself obeyed some unseen order. The schooner carried on through open water, fully operational and unnervingly precise, leaving those aboard neighbouring vessels to grapple with the impossible. A ship that performed all duties of a working crew while harbouring none of its living occupants. The schooner Surprise drifted on through the grey Atlantic, nets rising and falling, a ship alive with labour yet empty of the lives that should have guided her.